Hello, welcome to the February 28th, 2023 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo, and I am the host for the livestream. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you could submit questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de or simply ask questions in the live chat field. When asking questions, if you could indicate which version of Cubase you're running, whether it's LE, AI, Elements, Artist Pro, or other Steinberg programs, which operating system you're running on, and which level. So if you're running version 10, version 11, or 12, that information is helpful. If you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could refrain from asking the same question repeatedly, that would be greatly appreciated. It just kind of slows down the whole process. I will be behind throughout the live stream. I do my best to catch up and try to get to all the questions, but realize that we already probably have 5 or 6 questions already. So, but I'll try my best to catch up. Any questions or topics that we discuss in today's live stream will be indexed and pinned to the top of the comments field of the video, so you could refer back to that later. We also, if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, and I think we're almost at 25,000 topics, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating that website for us. We have 2 people that serve as moderators. So we have Agent K and Jazz Dude. They're not Steinberg employees. They just kind of do it to make it a better community. So we want to give special thanks to them. And also a special kudos to Jazz Dude for his work with the Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information that's available for the Steinberg community. Today is our last live stream of the month, and as is customary, we will be doing our Zoom meetup in about 2 hours. I just posted the Zoom invite, so you can look for that. So we'll be starting that in about 2 hours from now, and look forward to seeing everyone and seeing new faces. And it's just a great way to meet different people who are on the live streams and wonderful discussions. I look forward to it every month. So we'll be doing that in about 2 hours. So it'll be just kind of a shorter live stream than usual. So go about 2 hours here and then 2 or 3 hours, sometimes longer than 3 hours in the Zoom social. So we hope to see people there. And once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, basically as a product specialist, with Steinberg Products, and I'll be the host, and I'm presenting from in the United States, around outside Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. It's always fascinating to see people logging in from all over the world. So with that, we will go ahead and get started with questions. All right, so the first question is, hello, Greg. Is it possible to change the key scale of a track song via musical mode on Cubase Pro 12? So there's a couple ways of doing it. One is, let's say if we have a piece of music, say we'll take this classical piece here, we could add something called a transpose track. So let's say we listen to kind of the tonal center of it here. And right at this point in the song, we add a transpose track. So I want it to go up a semitone, starting right here. If I wanted to go back to it, let's say we want this to be -1 semitone. So now we could just have our piece kind of transpose. So go back to the original key, then down a semitone. And you can kind of hear how seamless that is. So let me know if that's what you want to accomplish. That's from Gadi Zana. So. All right, we have Patrick Becker saying hello, everyone. Okay, so we have a question from Ace Amadeus. Greg, hope you're doing well. Cubase 12, while listening back to a bass MIDI part, I wrote in Retrolog. I want to, tweak filters, resonance, and record those changes into Retrolog track. Thanks. Okay, so let's come over here. I think we may have a bass track in Retrolog already loaded up in this particular project. All right, so if we wanted to record and automate the particular changes, what we could do is just all right, and let's see what instrument this is. Okay, so this is Retrolog. So let's say want to, I'll just put a quick MIDI insert to make this a little more interesting. Okay, so I'm just going to record just a quick bass line here. Okay, so let's say we have that as our base, and if we wanted to automate like filters and stuff like that, all we would really have to do is, as we're working on this, click on the, open up the instrument, click on the W button, and as we do this, all right, so now we want to play back, and we can see that all the parameters that we just adjusted were automated. So we see the cutoff, and we'll adjust the resonance back to the cutoff. And that's all you would have to do. So just automate, just enable automation within a particular plugin. And if you're on an instrument track, you could see various automation will just kind of show up right there, so you can edit it if necessary. But so just, click on the particular track, and then once you just move the parameters, and then that should all be recorded for you, Ace. Glad you can make the live stream today. All right, so we see Alexander Plasko on. We have Benny from Sweden, John Costigan from Kenosha. We hope you're able to get onto the Zoom today earlier. Dallas LaRue says, Dallas LaRue's question is, what is the latest update for Cubase Pro 12? I'm running 12.04. So I think it's 12.052. Let me just check just to verify. So we come here, 12.0.52. And again, it's just, if you go to the Steinberg download assistant, you'll be able to access that particular version and install it. All right, so we see Filter Freak is happy, saying yabba dabba doo. Okay, so we have Sounds Like Matt checking in from Chicago. Thanks for joining us today. I say Patrick has a question. Hi, Greg. Easy way to put markers on both sides of a selected section. And I want to select the entire selection, 60 tracks. Select Enter selected section for copying that to new places. Okay, so if you have a number of different tracks that you want to copy, so I'm not sure if you need to do it with macros. Okay, so we'll show you. So let's come over here. Okay, so if we wanted to put macros, anytime that we grab or, put a marker, let's say, anytime that I have a range selection and let's say I hit the letter P, we could add what's called a cycle marker. And then if we wanted to, if we don't have the track, Let me just take the marker here up top just to show this. If you don't have a divided track list, you could double click and select with the range tool. And that would globally select in the particular range. So within the marker track, so if you have a cycle marker, and again, you could add a position marker and a cycle marker. So if you set a range, hit the letter P, that will set the left and right locators, and then you could add a cycle marker kind of based upon that. So now if I double click with the range selection tool, that would select the range of the markers. And if I wanted to copy or move that particular range, I could just hold down the Alt or Option key to do so. Now, you don't necessarily need to use a marker track for that. If you just hold down Control or Command plus the Shift key with the range selection tool, that will globally select the range of time, and then you could just move that accordingly, just like so. So let me know if that helps, Patrick, if that's what you wanted to do. All right, so you see, sounds like Matt is hoping to join a Zoom meeting today for the first time. We'll look forward to seeing you. Wonderful to see Brian Sawyer from Beulahville, North Carolina. Okay, so Gary Ward asks, hi Greg, could you explain how to set up cues in Cubase 12 using the control room and the routing protocols? Okay, so let's say I have, in this case, so I have guitar, bass, and drums. I want to set up individual headphone mixes for these three sources. So we're going to go first to our studio menu to audio connections, and we'll go to our control room. And what we want to do is add, and I may have all of mine in here already, but I'll just go ahead and remove this bus so that we could. All right, so I'm going to right click and we're going to add a cue. So we have 4 cue mixes that we could add. I'm going to call this, all right, so we'll call this drums. Okay, now what we want to do is to route this particular cue mix. So we have guitars, bass, and drums here. Okay, and we want to route these to distinct outputs on our audio interface. So if you're doing 3 headphone mixes, you may have a stereo out going to your monitors, and maybe outputs 3 and 4 go to the bass, outputs 5 and 6 go to guitars, and 7 and 8 go to drums. So whatever it is. So we need to physically route this to distinct, unique audio outputs. And those audio outputs can feed a headphone amplifier in your audio interface or a hardware headphone amplifier if your audio interface doesn't have enough headphone outs. So once that is done, we'll go to our big mixer and we hit the F3 key, and we want to come over and go to the racks and make sure that Q sends is turned on. Now we can see our Q sends here. So we can see our different levels. Now, if we wanted to kind of populate these easily, what we could do is just kind of right click in our control room side here. So make sure that the control room is active. And then once we have the control room visible, we will see our cue mixes laid out for us here. So we see guitars, bass, drums. Okay, so I'm going to right click here, kind of in a blank space, and we'll go to all cues. So I'm going to select all of my channels in my project. So I'll just come, we'll select all the tracks, and then let's go to all cues. And first thing we want to do is to activate the cue sends. So we do that, they're all turned on. And I want to take my current mix levels here and use that as the basis for our mix to start with. So I'm going to say use current mix levels. Okay, so now our mixer fader positions have been replicated there. And if we're going to do that, let's go ahead and use the current pan settings as well. So we have this set up. Now what we want to do is to probably provide a more me headphone mix. So this would mean that I'm going to select all of my drums, and let's go to our drums Q mix here. And we want to, first I'm going to enable Q link, quick link, so that as I make an adjustment here, we could increase the level. So for each track, we can see our cues, and this means that we're sending more of this particular track to my drums headphone mix. Let's go to my bass, and I want to send more of the bass, and I want to send more of, let's say, the kick drum to the bass player's headphone mix. So we'll say this is our bass. So I'm going to take my kick drum and send more kick to the bass player for their headphone mix. And let's say the guitars, everyone wants to hear more me. So let's come over here to the quick link again, and we'll adjust that way. Now, how we can monitor and kind of switch between to make sure everything is kind of set up as expected is in the control room as we play. I'm going to go to my QMix 4 here. So we can see that's so let's say on my guitar mix, I want the guitar tracks to be louder. So I adjusted the wrong one. So say, so we listen to this. Let's go to, let's say, our guitar mix. And I want the guitars to be louder here. So this is the current mix that we have in the project. So now this one, the drums are louder. And let's say for our bass player's headphone mix, we'll come over here and we'll hit Q2. So again, we go to, let's say, our drums, and we go, okay, I want the drums to be, the drummer's like, I need it louder, I need it louder. So again, we'll activate Q-Link. So that's our drummer's Q mix. Let's listen to, this would be, so as we listen to it, so guitars Q mix, the bass player's Q mix, the drummer's Q mix, and this is what's going on in the studio. So this way, you know, if I wanted to send more bass to the drum headphone mix, I would just say, okay, this is the bass track, and let's go to our drums here. So I want to send the bass into the drummer's Q headphone mix or Q mix, and less into the guitars, etc. So that's how you could get it set up. So let me know if that's helpful. Okay, so we see from Omar asks, Greg, where do you put the brick limiter in the main bus channel, pre or post? Do you need to use this 16 dithering plugin? Thanks. I generally would put it post, so that, and you could use, you know, so I would do my limiter, you know, directly there. So if I was doing a brick wall limiter, that's probably, I would put it in post. Doesn't, you know, you could put it into pre, and it's probably not going to make an impact. And if you wanted to come over here and have the Lin 1, the Lin dither, that's the dithering. So, and you could put that as probably the final stage of the master fader. So I probably had the dithering be the very last one. And that's probably how I would do it. So I would, by default, probably put it post fader, but you could do pre fader as well. But probably the last in the chain. All right, so we have Vishnu checking in from India, running Cubase 12 and macOS Monterey. Thanks for joining us. All right, and we have Trond joining us, and we see Tiago from Brazil, Andreas from Sweden. Thanks for being on. All right, we have McMental Music Makers from Toronto. Thanks for being on. Wonderful to see Gerald Ely from Martinez, California. All right, so we see question. When exporting, I would like to export from left to right locators. When I click export, it automatically selects the beginning and end of audio. So let's go ahead and say if we wanted to do just our left and right locators here and do an export. All right, so I'm not sure if you're doing it. All right, so let's say if I just do a quick export here, and I'm going to create an audio track so we could watch this. Let me just, I think we're at 44.1 here. All right, so I'm just going to do my left and right locators here. I believe that's how it works by default, but let's come over here and just say export audio, and we'll create a unique name. And then you can see that that is all that was exported there. So let me know if you're doing it from the export audio mix down, if that's where you're doing it from, but that, generally always uses the left and right locators for the boundaries. So let me just see if there's a way to turn that off, but I think that's on by default. So, but let me know if that's how you did it, but you just see it just exported the left and right locators for me right there. So let me know if that is, if that's how you're doing it. That's from YPE. All right, so we have Shane Hayes saying good evening to everyone from Great Britain. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see from Patrick, I programmed chords, easy way to hear the sound to do changes without clicking play. Select a bunch of chords, randomize velocity. Can I see like graph? Okay, so let's go ahead and try it out real quick. All right, we'll go to this project. All right, so just says I program chords, an easy way to hear the sound to do changes without clicking play. So let's say if we just jump back and make sure that. Okay. All right, so just see for Patrick. So want to hear the sound to do changes without clicking play. Select a bunch of chords, randomize velocity. I see like graph. So I don't know a way to just kind of, we can select the chords here. I think it's going to be the same velocity, but if we're on a particular part, one of the things that you might be able to do is if you go to, so if we have this track selected and go to project to chord track, we could say chords to MIDI on that particular track. And then if you wanted to randomize the velocities of all of these so you don't have to worry about it, you could do that without having to play. But let me know if I'm misunderstanding, Patrick. Okay, so we see, I think this is from Vishnu. When I tried to export the tracks, the resulting file doesn't have audio in it. Am I missing something here? I've tried the Windows system at home and it works fine. So it could be like, maybe just a routing thing. So, let's say, and we'll jump back to this other project here where we're at. So one of the things could be like if you have like a number of tracks that are record enabled on a track, and let's say now I go to export audio mix down. We'll export. All right, and now we listen to it, to our resulting file. And we don't hear drums because all of these were actually record enabled. So make sure that you don't have like a number of tracks record enabled when you do the export audio mix down. Other things to check is when you come, make sure that you have like, if you have it set for single, make sure that you have like, if you're exporting your main stereo out, make sure that that's checked and not some other file. So, if I exported now my audio mix down, it would export my Maple kit because that's selected, but there's no actual information that's on that MIDI track. So again, if I want to undo that and just... So as you're doing this, make sure that you have the correct output selected here. And then when you export audio mix down, you could just see that it will include all your different elements. So it's probably maybe the wrong thing is selected here, or if you have maybe a different output. So that would be my guess why it's silent. All right, so we see, sounds like Matt asked, can I quickly rename multiple files the way that the project editor can do with track names? Use case, I export my tracks file, export selected tracks at the end of the session, but all I really want is the final track versions I created, which are all bounced and cleaned up. However, that function sends everything from the other track versions as well, so then I have to go through and sort them out. Preparing the final track version file names with something like Z or O makes it easy to delete the rest, but I haven't found a way to do it rather than manually. So I know that there is kind of a batch renamer that's in Nuendo that's not inside of Cubase that can do some of those particular functions. All right, so you're doing, you want to export the selected tracks at the end of the session. So maybe instead of the export selected tracks, perhaps what you could do, like let's say if I had a number of different track versions in here. So let's say, okay, I want to duplicate the track version. And let's say at this point, I just want to So I have multiple track versions, one without an edit and one with an edit. So if I exported the selected tracks, the selected tracks would export that. But if you just do like a batch export and maybe just go to audio mixdown, and if you know what everything is, I would just say, okay, we want to do an audio mixdown. We want to do multiple. So I'm going to take all of my audio channels here. We'll keep it dry if we wanted to. And then at this point, we could actually choose to create a new project. So I export audio. Here's my exported audio, and none of the track versions are carried over. It's just kind of the final particular version. So instead of doing the export selected tracks, I would do just the multi-export. So again, just come over here to export audio mixdown. And when you do this, it could place it into its own unique file folder. Select multiple, and then just simply select all of your audio tracks, and that will give you kind of the final version without having to do the exporting selected tracks. And you know that is, and we could go to like a naming edition here. So if you go to the naming scheme, we could just say, let's go to export audio mixdown and click here. And then if you wanted to put your own kind of free text in, so you could just double click here and say, okay, I want 0 or final stem. And then that could be added to the name of the file if you still needed to change the name at that point. But I think that instead of doing the export selected tracks, just simply do multiple, like a multi-stem export. And I think that will get you to where you want to go. But if not, just let me know. All right, so Jay and Jem asks, hi Greg, is there a way to export a batch of stereo and mono files without them all ending up stereo when imported into Pro Tools? Thanks. So all you'd have to do is, let's say at this point I want it to, I'll just drop in some stereo files here quickly. Okay, so we have mono and stereo files. So realize that depending on how you choose to export, like with processing. So if you have effects that are on tracks and you wanted to export them and you choose to include the particular processing, then it's going to take your mono to replicate it when you export it. If your mono snare was going into and using a stereo reverb, that when you export it with effects for that snare to sound the same, it's going to turn it into stereo and then turn it into and then because it's going into a stereo bus or going into a stereo effect. So let's say I'm here and now I want to have a combination of mono and stereo file. So all I would have to do is go to export, audio mixdown, and we could just do this as, we'll do a new project again. So I'm going to include all of my audio files, including, so these are all mono and these are stereo. So I'm going to just choose disabled dry, and we'll export, and we'll just do the small region. So we can see that all of my tracks that were mono, and my stereo files were stereo. It's when it turns into stereo is when the particular audio, when there's processing on it that's stereo, that's when it will turn it into stereo. But if, again, you go and select dry for the effect setting when doing kind of your export audio mix down and you select multiples. At this point, choose disable dry. And I think even if we do inserts in channel strip, that will maintain the mono is mono and stereo is stereo. We'll see here in just a second. No, so because it's going through like this stereo output. So just choose dry, and then that will, so when we do the export audio mix down, come over here. So export audio mix down, and then when you select multiple, just choose this to be disabled dry. And then your mono will stay mono, your stereo stay stereo, your 5.1 will stay 5.1, etc. Okay, so we have a question. Is it possible to create a chain like some vocal tracks? Sorry, of course my chat field just jumped. Okay, so I think I'm... All right, so we see from Patrick asks a question. Is it possible to create a chain like some vocal track? One is going to reverb, same track going to distortion and delay, automating it. So if you wanted to take, a particular chain of effects, you can. So let's say I want this going, this bass going into an effects channel. So let's make it a flanger. Okay, so we'll just come here under modulation. Okay, so we're going to make that go to a flanger, and I wanted to send this to a particular group. And let's say on the group, I wanted it to have distortion. So we'll come over here to our inserts, and let's get to, let's say we want quadrifuzz on it. Okay, so if I wanted to save this and so, there we have a chain. Now, if I wanted to save this as, if I wanted to save a particular chain, one of the things that we could do is go to here to File, go to Export, and you could do Export Selected Tracks. So we could choose to copy the media files or not. I'll choose not to, just for demonstration purposes. And we'll call this Patrick. And we'll just put on our desktop. Okay, so now if I wanted to import that chain into a different project, we could say we export it as as selected tracks, and we import it as a track archive. So now we'll come and we'll find our, so here's our file. So we could choose to select all of the tracks, and all the routing would automatically be preserved. And then you could automate whatever parameters within that you want as well. So if you just wanted to take like processing that's on one particular track, so say, okay, on this track, I want it to have, both the inserts, let's say I wanted distortion and a flanger, whatever plugins that we want to work with. And then if it was just a single path, we could right click and save a track preset, and then your track presets you could just access. So if I'm looking at all my track presets, we'll go to media, let's jump home, and we'll go to presets, to track presets, and we'll say, okay, here's audio, and now I could just kind of drag and drop track presets right from here and load them onto various tracks. And you can have a multi-track preset as well. All right. All right, so we see Lisa Legrand on, so glad you could join us. Okay, so we see from Patrick asks, Greg, how to copy multiple VST automation to other tracks and how to grab automation to make changes all at the same time. Can I group the automation? How to easily draw curves? Okay, so let's say I'm here. Let's look at, okay, so let's say I wanted to have my volume automation here. So let's go ahead and make this a little larger. Okay, so I will just kind of come and let's just, okay, so I wanted to draw in automation. So let's say one of the things I could do, and let me just turn off so we can see this a little easier. Okay, so I have 2 points here. Now let's say if I wanted to first draw in a curve, so let's say I have 2 points directly here. So as you hover over the middle of 2 points, you can now kind of draw in like, Bezier curves just like that. And let's say we have on this, we wanted to also copy over panning. So let's say, okay, I want to do my linked panner. Okay, so I want to come over, let's say, and copy this automation. So let's see if we can do both lanes at once. So let's say, okay, I want this to be my linked panner. So I'm going to select this information copy. And we will go to, let's see if we go to select these automation. And then we could just hit, and if you want it at the same time, you could adjust, you could hit Alt plus V, Alt or Option plus V, and that way it won't be kind of pasted at the wrong time. And then all you have to do is kind of enable the read to have that automation. So you could just copy multiple automation sources between different tracks. All right, wonderful to see Val Lee checking in from Vienna, and we see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. Glad you could join us. Go ahead and paste in the Zoom meetup, which we'll be doing in about an hour and 15 minutes. So I'll paste the meeting info, the link. All right, and we have Stefan checking in from Sweden. See, Valley says, today in pipe, Virginia tobacco. Fitting, I think. So I'm not a big advocate for tobacco, but if you like it, that's fine. It probably keeps my taxes down somewhere, but if they even pay taxes. Yeah. All right, so we see from Emmanuel Morin, Cubase 12 Pro, is it possible to launch my version as Spectral Layer 9 Pro instead of Spectral Layer 1? From the audio extensions menu. So yeah, and basically what it's going to do, if you have different versions, so the Spectral Layers is basically the same program, but depending on what license is seen is what is available. So like, you don't see, if you have like Spectral Layers 9, I don't necessarily, when I go to extensions, I don't see like Spectral Layers 1 or Spectral Layers Element, even though it's, it's the same thing. But you should be able to, once you have Spectral Layers 9 installed, just launch it directly from the extension right there. And now as it's doing its analysis of it, I double click and my sample editor is now turns into spectral layers. So yeah, you could definitely run it from directly from the extension. So, but if you have, but it's going to be, think of spectral layers 1 and spectral layers elements as subsets of functions and features that are in Spectral Layers Pro. So if you have Spectral Layers Pro, it may just immediately say Spectral Layers, and that would work with the Pro version. All right, you see Michael Teams wants people to whack the like button, so that allows us to continue to do these live streams. So I always forget to mention that. So some marketing person's upset with me probably. All right, so we have Bruce Bruton, who smashed the like button on his way in. Thank you for that. And we have John Barry checking in from the English Riviera in Old England. All right, we see Soren in Sweden. Thanks for joining us. All right, so NPS Livestream asks, hey, Greg, how can I cut and move a section of audio and keep the automation attached to it? All right, so let's say I have this audio. So it's usually by default. If you go to Edit menu, you'll see Automation Follows Events. So I'm going to cut this piece of audio here. And now as I move it, we'll see that the automation, I'll copy it, that the automation automatically follows it, but make sure that on the Edit menu that you have Edit Automation Follows Events. If that's unchecked, I can move the automation and it's not tied to the particular event. But when we go to Edit Automation Follows Events, then we move it, the automation is tied directly to it. All right, so all right, so you see Patrick, just a clarification on his range question. So it says, yes, but thank you, but snap to grid won't work with Control Shift for the range selection, which is why he uses markers. All right, so let's zoom in here. All right, so let's say I want to use my range selection. So as I have my snap turned on, so if I grab my range selection, I can freely place anywhere. So I have my grid currently set to a beat. So now as I go to my range selection and edit it, you can see that it's going to be snapping directly to the beat right here. So it looks like the range selection will snap to the beat just like that. And if we wanted to, maybe when we're doing multiple events, let's see. And if you're doing, let's say if we do multiple events, so let's say we do kind of a global range selection. If you just grab the edges, then that would snap to the grid right here. So even if while you're entering it in, so if you're entering in your range selection, just kind of go to the right or left edge, and then you could adjust it and then have it follow and snap to the grid. So let me know if that helps, Patrick. All right, so we see, sounds like Matt asks, how can I get audio from Cubase when remoting into my home studio PC from a laptop? I'm currently using Chrome Remote Desktop. I've heard maybe Sonobus is a solution. So you might have to, so if you wanted to like remotely access something and have the Chrome Remote Desktop pass the audio so you could hear the edits that you're doing, you may have to take the audio outputs of your interface and set it to inputs like of your, you may have to physically connect the audio outs from your interface and connect it directly to like the sound card if you have a built-in audio interface, or another interface, and maybe take the outputs. Like what I do for the live streams here is I take the audio outputs from my interface and I feed it into a mixer that has a USB output, and that's where my microphone is combined at that USB mixer. So maybe having, if you have another audio interface, either the built-in interface or another audio interface, like maybe if you're on your second or third generation audio interface, is to take the audio out of the out of your Cubase into a secondary audio interface and make that the primary interface for your operating system. But realize that there will be delays, so it may be a little out of sync when using kind of remote desktop solutions. All right, we see DJ Lines saying hello to everyone. All right, and we have Toxic Vox from Liverpool. He says he's glad to have made it early today. And we have Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo. All right, so we see from Patrick ask, I couldn't open sampler track key editor as separate window with browser window. It's hiding. If I select samples, I use sampler rhythm to easily change samples in sampler track with the browser window. All right, so let's say if we have, I'll just jump back here. I want to make sampler track, so I'm going to create a sampler track. So as we do this, the key editor would actually just show up. So we see that the sampler track's been created. And now when I double click here, and then if I needed to tweak the samples, I could, let's go to the modulation. And let's say, okay, we'll do kind of a classic filter. And then if I just click on edit, and then I think you could just use like, there's keyboard shortcuts. I think it's like Alt to navigate back and forth between the sampler and the editor view. So at this point, is it? Let's see if I can remember so you could just hold down Alt or Option or Control, Alt plus Control, left and right arrow, or Command plus Option, left and right arrow, to kind of just toggle back and forth between the two views. So once you're in the lower zone, you could just kind of go back and forth and hit the tab key to navigate to different zones, just like that. All right, so we just see from DJ Lines, says, I'm curious about the end result of this project. So let me know which project, if it's a Cubase project or the Club Cubase live stream projects. But maybe if you could clarify, that would be helpful. All right, so we see from Michael Teams, glad you can make it today. So we see a question, installing an external instrument, trying to help a friend and messed it up again. One more time, please, especially the software parts. So what you need to do is to go to your audio connections. So go to your studio menu, to audio connections, you'll see external instrument. So let's say I wanted to add a Yamaha montage. So I'm going to add external instrument. We'll give it a name. So we'll say montage. And we'll hit OK. And what we need to do at this point is just to define which audio inputs that the external instrument is connected into the audio interface. Once that has been done, right click and we say add track, add an instrument, and then you'll see under external plugins, come over there, click on the montage, and now that will add the track and that will send out to the montage and then be able to take the audio back into the montage. Okay, so we see from John Barry, hi Greg, I like track presets, but saving several audio tracks in a group with the group. The outputs of the audio track do not go to the group as saved, but to the master outputs. So if you want to incorporate routing, that's when it probably makes sense to use like selected tracks. So say I want to take these and route them to a group track. So let's route it to a group channel. We'll call it drums. Okay, and let's say I wanted to route that to another group channel. And I wanted to take these tracks and route to an effects channel. Okay, so now I wanted to take my effects channels and all of my drums, and let's export the selected channels. Okay, and I'll just reference this as a drums with FX and group. Okay, so I'm going to do a new project. And let's import a track archive. All right, so we'll see drums. We'll select all. And now we can see that all of the routing, and our effect sends have been maintained. So this drum group should be going to drum group 2. So exporting selected tracks will retain all the routing. Track presets are going to be more primarily used for, like presets of different effects and EQ and channel strip configurations. All right, so we see from Sven Isaacson, I just noticed that I had an activation prompt for Absolute 6. Does that mean all instruments, including VST sounds, now run under the new system? Is there anywhere I can find an updated list, updated instruments? So all the ones that come with Howley 6, there's still some third-party content that, I don't think is on the Steinberg licensing and maybe Iconica. I think it's coming soon. But let's say when we go to our Steinberg download assistant, there's a big chunk of them that have been migrated to the new Steinberg licensing. But if you want to see what's been updated to the new Steinberg licensing that comes, with the Absolute license, you can just go to your Absolute 6. And as we look at this, all of these are now working under the Steinberg licensing system. But I think if you had, I'm not sure if all the third-party ones like Simple, if those have migrated over. Some of them I know have, but you could just kind of check to make sure and look in your My Steinberg account. So, you could see what content you have that is available to migrate to the licensing. So if you just say, so let's go to so you could see, right under here, you could say, you could see like this, the Steinberg licensing products, the ones that are available that you have in your account. And you could see also, let's say if we go back and if you want to show your e-licensors, you could look at this, and I think that you'll see notifications in here for that. So look in your My Steinberg account under your products as well. But not every single Hallion library is there. It's coming, So obviously Hallion 7 and the Absolute were like a big chunk of remainder ones from Steinberg. All right, so we see from Patrick ask, Greg, is there any settings like I click anywhere the cursor starts to play the song in the project, because every time you click on the upside is annoying? So yeah, all you have to do is, let's say as we're playing this, I think it's just Control plus Shift. I'll verify here real quick. But let's say while it's playing, Alt plus Shift, and then you could click anywhere without selecting. So Alt or Option plus Shift, and that will start the project playback from anywhere that you're in your project. All right, so we see David M checking in from Liverpool. So he says his daft computer used a wrong name earlier. So when in doubt, always blame my computer too. All right, so we see from Robert Higgins, says, not a real Cubase question. I have VST instruments on my C drive, Windows 11, Hallion, Sonic SE, BBC, Symphony Orchestra, Contact, etc. I want to transfer those libraries to an external drive. How do I do that? Do I have to reinstall the new drive, or could I just move them from my C drive to the new one? So every company will have a slightly different procedure, but I think it's pretty common to have this. So on the Steinberg ones, really all you have to do is go to your Steinberg library manager. You could say, okay, this is on this library, my Amped Electra, I want it to move it, and this is installed with Cubase. And then you could just pick a folder where you want to move it to. So this doesn't work with Contact. Native Instruments would have their own, and other companies, BBC, Symphony Orchestra, so Spitfire would have their own, probably a very similar method, I would assume. So. We see that Val Lee uses this brick wall limiter first in the change to kind of hit his plugins hard. So. Okay, so we have a question from Drazi Eternal. I was wondering, how do I add 8 effects tracks to the send of a track all at the same time, and can turn them all on at the same time and turn them all up at the same time? Okay, so I'm not sure if we can do it all at once. I mean, it's generally, but let's say, all right. All right, so say if we go to the sends, so I think we could add one at a time here. But if we wanted to do this across multiple, let me just add a couple of effects channels. All right, just add 2 more. All right, so let's say we have 4 different effects ends. So I don't know a way to add multiple effects ends to, at once. And if you can tell me if there's like a particular need that you need to do, but if we wanted to turn on like the effects ends for multiple channels at once, if that was something that you needed to do, we could just hold down like Alt plus Shift and activate. Say, okay, now I want, the delay. I want the stereo delay. Turn it on so I could add for multiple tracks at once and adjust levels. And let's come over here to reference and add that as well. So, but I don't know of a way to add 8 different effects at once. But you could add all of your effects very easily to your existing tracks, because generally, if you're going to add effects ends, you have to add a destination first. So sorry if that wasn't helpful. See, Patrick asks, Greg, what's special on today's Zoom meet? So we're just going to meet and kind of catch up on stuff. I was trying to get a kind of a noted user, but he's actually flying today to Los Angeles. So maybe we'll see if we can get him for next month's, but we'll just kind of hang out and catch up. All right, so we have Jay and Jem checking in from Los Angeles. Thanks for being on. All right, so we have a question from Kevin Anderson. Greg, how did you learn so much about Cubase? Where would you suggest to learn more about Cubase? All the ins and outs of Cubase. I've kind of grown up with the program, so I've been running it since 1991. So it wasn't as deep of a program then, and I've worked with the company since '92, kind of promoting it. So I've been fortunate to grow with the program as it's evolved and added new features. I would, in learning effectively, I would, realize that you don't have to learn everything at once. Figure out a small task. I want to do drum editing. I want to record my vocal. I want to record vocals and maybe hear a reverb somehow afterwards. Figure out like small tasks along the way and get those done and have those building blocks and have that foundation. You don't have to be a master of everything. The only person whose job requirement, that is probably me, where, I have to figure out how people run Cubase, not for my own personal use, but, for how they think about it and how they approach creating. So you don't have to know every single thing, but realize that when you need a particular function, that it's there. But just like when you sit down at a musical instrument, like your first day, when you sat down playing a guitar, you didn't play Eruption by Van Halen on day one. You didn't play a Chopin piano piece on day one. You have to kind of get those fundamentals and just kind of stick to it and realize that whatever long circuitous path, of twists and turns, that there's probably someone that's been there and has thought of all the possible outcomes so that you won't be stuck. So, learn little bits, learn keyboard shortcuts that will speed up your workflow also. All right. So we see from a question, I'm using marker tracks to set up markers like this, 0.15 seconds, 0.30 seconds, but Cubase adds the ID number in front, which makes it look like a different value. How can I hide the ID? All right, so let's come over and I will just add a marker. I'll just revert this quickly. Okay, so we have a marker here. So let's say now as we see our ID numbers. So let's come over here. Let's click on the edit, the markers window, and then you'll see a settings category here. So you could say show marker IDs on the marker track. So if we have these labeled like 0.15, 0.3, imagine I said 0.3, 0.45, 1. All right, so now we have our markers labeled. So all we would have to do is as we look at our particular markers, we could see that these will be labeled. And so if I turn off the show marker IDs on the marker track, that will hide those for you. So again, to get there is to select the marker track, hit the edit channel settings button on the marker track, go to settings, and then you could turn on and off marker IDs. All right, wonderful to see Uno Memento from Lapland in Finland. I think he's still maybe on his ski call or his ski vacation. So I hope you're having a great time. All right, so we see Jane Gem asks, and we showed this just a little bit, how do we batch export mono and stereo files without the resulting files all being stereo? And so what you need to do is as you're exporting, do your batch audio export, select multiple, and under effects, you want to choose dry. That way your stereo will stay stereo, your mono will stay mono. And we did show it just a little while ago, so I won't repeat it since we have kind of an abbreviated session. But choose dry there, and that should do it for you. So we see Captain Planlos. Hi, is it possible to switch to different views, fader, insert, sends of the mix console by shortcuts? So I did a very clever shortcut once, and then someone's like, why don't you just use the page up, page down buttons on the mix console? So you could just use page up, page down, page up. So you could do it just kind of like that to navigate. So page up, page down from your computer keyboard, and then you could toggle back and forth between the channels, inserts, and sends. So it was one of the things I learned from someone on a live stream. I always say I learned things on live streams as well. Okay, so you have a question. Greg, when you edit channel settings on a mono track, why does it say mono to stereo at the top? I don't understand the arrow and the stereo part. It's probably because this track is routed to a stereo out. So if I created like a mono group, so say I take my bass track and we send it to a group channel and we make this group channel mono. And let's create a mono output. So say now on my bass track, we see that it's going mono. We say mono and it's going to group 1. If we take this track and let's say instead of stereo out, I choose it to the left output, here we'll see that it's kind of going through the process here and then it's just going to my left stereo output. So that's just showing the routing. So most of your mono tracks will be going to the stereo output, and that's what it's showing you and indicating right there. All right, I'm going to go ahead and post the Zoom meetup link. We'll be doing that about 45 minutes. Post that one more time here. We'll post it again before. Okay. All right. So we see from David M. No, you covered this before. Forget the quick way to make all the tracks narrower or wider. So really, all you have to do if you're in the mix console, so if you're in the mix console, just G and H, just like you would zoom in and out horizontally. In the project window, you could come here. This is good for my eyes. We've got Mr. Magoo size faders, or if you need to see more faders. So just G and H, just like that. Okay, so we see from Patrick, just a further clarification. It says, Greg, I want to hear chords inside the key editor and randomize velocity for notes on the chords inside the editor. Is it possible, or do I need to do it for each? Okay, so let's say, take a look. Okay, so let's say if I'm in like a full screen key editor, let's get to our global tracks and let's listen to our chord track. So if I enable my global tracks here, this allows us to see the chord track, and I could audition. So let's see if we could. Okay, now if I wanted to take notes, I'm not sure if it's notes that were in the chord, in the key editor. So let's say if I just randomly draw in. So at this point, if we wanted to randomize notes that were within a chord, I think we could do that. Let's come over to Logical Editor and say type is equal to note. Property set to is part of chord. And let's take our velocity and set random values between 80 and 120. And let me just, maybe I have one thing selected, sorry. So now I could just take notes that are within a chord and randomize the velocities if notes aren't in the chord. So now, so you could do, so let me know if that's helpful, but if you wanted to just listen to chords in the key editor, if you're in a full key editor, just make sure you go to global tracks, and then you can see the chord track, and you could audition the chords right from there, Patrick. Okay. Right, reading through. All right, so we see Patrick asked a question. Greg, best way to create unison for vocals and how much layer normally pros do? Does Cubase have any options for that? That I found very audio for best tuning, but I wonder, so, what one of the plugins that you could use if you're looking to do like something, specifically to make vocals sound like it's multi-tracked. Here we just come to this one. Is check out the Cloner plugin. All right, so I'm just going to run this as an insert here. Then I think it's under modulation. The moment I laid eyes on him. So say you want to do 4 voices. And here we can set kind of our. And I was falling before I knew. All at once he kissed my face. The world was like a brand new place. Felt my fears all fly away. Don't it make it feel good? So it's before we kick into the moment I laid eyes on him, he touched my hand. So let's say we just take this and we'll take the mix. And especially on like background vocals. So you have 4 different voices where you could have different delays and different levels of detuning. All at once he kissed my face. The world was like a brand new place. Felt my fears all fly away. Don't it make it feel good? So, but I know a lot of people will stack lots of vocals. I remember being with my friend Clay Oswald, who's kind of known for his work with Gloria Estefan and John Cicada and lots of other projects. I've seen him do, where they're doing like, 9 background vocals where it's like 3 harmonies, but one is center, one's pan left, hard right. And then, they kind of repeat that process. And if you have a great singer, you may not need to do it at all. All right, so we see from Valley. Sorry, my chat field just jumped. I see Sable Winters on. Glad you can make it. All right, see if I can find where I was. I see I have lots of questions ahead of me. Okay, so kind of in the neighborhood. All right, so we see from Valley, says, yo, Greg, is there a reason my Cubase crashes when I want to open the UR22C options on the left? Cubase 12 Pro, Windows 11. No, I mean, when I come over, let's say, if I set my input on a particular channel, let's see if I have my inputs defined in my audio connections. Okay, so let's say I want to set an input here. So I've never had it crash doing this, but make sure that you have the latest, the latest drivers for that, as well as the latest extension. But I haven't had any problems with this wanting to misbehave. So another way to kind of maybe access it is if you go to, see if you get the same results. If you go to F3 and then go to your hardware tab in the mixer. So once we have, and then you could see settings in the hardware tab in the mixer as well, but you may have to actually, let's just get to my racks here. Okay, and make sure that you have hardware turned on. Then one of them I have, let me just see the, so, and then once you kind of click here, see if you get access to settings here for the mixer, if you get the same thing. But I haven't run into any problems, but it can't hurt to make sure you have the latest drivers for the UR22C as well. All right, you see Michael Pierce is working on just getting some ISRC codes for some pre-masters, and he's going to pop back. Hope to see you on the Zoom meetup. All right. All right, so we have Gregor Hasmiller saying hi. So, and Michael Teams wants people smash the like button. So we see from Machine Storm, do you get asked every live stream how to sidechain? Kind of seems that way. So I'm not sure. I don't think I've gotten asked today yet. So, but maybe that's a veiled sidechain question. All right, so we see Northern Love. It says, and maybe it's a question. I realize that VST2 is not supported. Is there any way to fix this other than JBridge or some kind of hack? I'm not able to open most of my previous projects from Cubase 8. Why did Steinberg do this? So VST2 is still supported. 32-bit plugins are not. So VST2 plugins are supported. The only scenario where VST2 plugins aren't supported is when you want to run native on Apple M1 processors, but VST2 plugins are still supported. But if you have 32-bit plugins, make sure that you're running 64-bit. All right, so you see a question from Patrick. Greg, is there a key command for audio? Like I sang something, I forgot to record, I need that. What can I do? Does Cubase have retrospective recording for audio? So it's not kind of invoked the same way, but you can have it set. So let's come here to preferences, and let's go to, I think, recording to audio. So record audio. So here you could have an audio pre-record in seconds. So what would happen is, let's say I punched in here at measure. All right, so let's say I'm going to just set a quick punch. Let's say at measure 49. All right, so let's say I just want to come here and let's put my left and right locators here. So I'm going to just kind of punch in and out on this file here. Okay, and let me just do a new track version just to make it a little cleaner visually. So, all right, so we're going to come here, play. So we see the punch-in occurs. All right, so let's say we stopped recording. We have our event. Now, if we have a 1 second pre-record, what we could do is take the beginning of this particular event and move it over by 1 second. So if that is set longer, like 2 seconds or 3 seconds, you could just kind of take the beginning of the particular event and slide it over by the amount of time. I think you could do up to 60 seconds. Like that. So if you kind of missed like, the beginning of a file or, I just had this great idea, you could just simply roll back the particular recording like that. So it's kind of like a retrospective recording, kind of at the end of the particular file. So. All right, so we see from Stefan Carlos Benson, thanks again for your time. In the expression map question, could you give an example of why we would want to use the controller in the output mapping? I can only imagine outputting notes. So let's go ahead and take a quick look. Let's see if this is... All right, so just... All right, so let's come over here. Let's get to our expression map. All right, so is it, let me just... So I'm just looking at the output mapping. So is, when you say the output mapping, is it this? And if it's this for like the remote for the output mapping, some instruments respond to articulations via, via MIDI notes for key switches, and some will respond to different articulations from different values on within one particular MIDI CC. So I think, some instruments will do it that way, but let me know if that's the output that you're talking, or the output mapping here. So if, so maybe when we switch this, so depending on the instrument and how the instrument responds to different articulations, it may respond via MIDI CC versus a typical note on for like a key switch information. So. Okay, so we have a question from Gregor Hasmiller. Is there a way to separate a MIDI track that contains chords into a monophonic MIDI tracks? For example, you play a brass ensemble and want to separate it automatically. So you could do some, logical editor functions for that. So let's take a quick look. All right, so just open this up. So let's say we have like this. All right, so let's say we have chords and we wanted this split up. Let me just make it a little more chord friendly here. Okay, so there is a logical editor preset, or you could do it in a logical editor, where you could say, okay, I just want to take so let's come here, and okay, so we want to extract to track, and we could say, we want to extract notes, and the property is set to context variable, I think it will say, equals the lowest note in a chord. So we'll say our root note. So now as I do that, that extracted the root notes of the chords and automatically placed it there. And if I do it again, we get another part. So we could do it kind of like that, just extracting the various notes. One other method of doing this is in the score editor. So say we have this and we look at it in the score editor. We'll just make it a grand staff quickly. All right, so at this point we could go to score and go to functions and explode. And we'll say we want to create 3 new tracks. And then each of the parts will automatically, the different voices will be kind of split to different tracks that way. All right, Balsa asks, hi Greg, can I select part of an audio event with the range tool and then drag and drop that selection to another empty track? All right, so let me just add an empty audio track here. Okay, so I don't think it's any problem. So if I just want to take just a portion of that and drag it just like that, and if you want to copy it, hold down the Alt or Option key, and then you could just copy the selected range. But so anything you want to do, just kind of select just a portion of the file and then just drag away. And Gregor is just sending his greetings from Bavaria. All right, so we have a question. Can you route external hardware as dual mono? For example, I want to use an external EQ after a mid-side encoder plugin. So it's, instead of configuring it as like a stereo in-out device, when you go to your audio connections, let's say under external effects, is just to add an external effects, and instead of this being stereo, just add 2 mono external effects. And then this could be, EQ left, EQ right. So you could just, instead of it being treated as a stereo device, you just have it treated as dual mono, just right there. So you see from Soren, he's worried about termination of VST2. I expect a lot of trouble with VST2 instruments. It won't work if I follow along to latest Cubase later on. So, if you're in Cubase 12, realize that your Cubase 12, your VST2 will always work, but also realize that, VST2, VST3 was introduced 15 years ago. So, if you were a plugin that was born then, at least in the United States, you'd almost be able to drive a car. So just some perspective. All right, so we see Patrick, just kind words, says thank you so much for helping and teaching us Cubase. So you're welcome. Glad to be able to be of help. All right, so we have Freddie Tarling says, "Hi, I'm new to Cubase 12. Where's the best place to start?" So, maybe start with a template. So you say, okay, I'm, depending on what your instrument is, say, okay, I want to do recording. So maybe I just wanted to do like a very simple, guitar, so you'll have these different templates. So maybe, okay, I want to do recording. I want an acoustic guitar and vocal. And this will then prompt you where you want to start the files, where you want the files to be stored. Click on activate. And then at this point, you could just have, your template set up. So you come here, hit record on your transport, just like you would on any recorder. And you could have everything kind of set up with plugins and, your vocals. So depending on what type of projects you want to do, if you're doing all MIDI, it would probably be a different thing. If you're doing, guitar and vocals, using a template like this. But, I think the important thing is always, just to hit record and play around. You're not going to set off a nuclear bomb or anything by accident. You could just, at this point, just start off very simple and realize that, Cubase will have every feature that you need, and come to the, watch. If you have questions, go to cubaseindex.com, type it in, because we've answered, almost 25,000 questions, and, check out the live streams and ask particular questions as you run into them, or send an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, and we could cover your particular questions on the live streams. All right, so we see a comment from Northern Love. Just says all my VST2 64-bit plugins were blocked. So make sure you may have VST3 64-bit as well. But VST2 plugins. But realize that when your plugin is being blocked, it's because it causes system instabilities. So if you want the plugin to work and have the program crash as a result of that plugin, that's why that plugin is being blocked. So many of those plugins have multiple, VST3 versions or counterparts. So, like we all migrated from floppy disks to CD-ROMs, it's just kind of natural evolution. All right, now you see just comment, I just don't understand why it's not possible to have a 32-bit VST2 converter or something. So you could try to use a third-party one like JBridge, but realize that causes a lot of system instabilities. I see a question, when is Cubase 13 coming? So when it's all fixed and when it's all created and ready to ship, that's when it'll run. All right, so you see Northern Love just says Cubase 12 is blocklisted the majority of my paid plugins. They're all 64-bit, so check with, if you let us know which particular plugins that you're running that are being blocklisted, that would be helpful instead of all of them are being blocklisted. So I'm still running a lot of VST2 plugins on my system as well. All right, so you see a quick question. How do you do a Haas effect on vocals? So it's really just, two very tight delays that are panned. So let's jump over to this project.
touch my hand.
All right, so I'm going to take off the...
And the sky turned magic blue. And I was
So you could use kind of the, the cloner plugin. You could use to do that very easily, but a typical way of doing kind of a Haas effect is, let's say, okay, we want to go to stereo delay. Let's deactivate sync. All right, and I want it to pan. Let's say, okay, so we have this panned hard left and hard right, and let's put this at like 5 milliseconds. Let's put this at 12.
You touch my hand, and the sky turned magic blue.
And you could play with the different times, but it's really just kind of panning very short delays on top of each other. So you could do a stereo delay, pan each of the delays, and that could give you kind of a Haas effect. All right, I know I'm going to post the Zoom meetup here one more time. And then I know we had some questions that were sent in, so let me get to those before it gets too crazy. All right, and we see that we're at 90 likes. So again, if you've learned something new, make sure you do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that. All right, so we had a question, how to create a macro to hide tracks with no events in the selected range. Okay, so let's say if I have a range selected here and I wanted to hide tracks that have no data. So one of the things that you could do is to if you set the left and right locators around that range by hitting the letter P, and then if you go to your configurations, just to the right of configurations, you can say show tracks with data between the left and right locators. So we can now just come over there and that will hide any track that doesn't have any data between that left and right locator. So if we go to show all tracks, now if you wanted to kind of turn that into a macro, we could do that by just combining those two particular steps. So we'll just say, I think I already have it created. So it's just the hide tracks with no range. So we said transport, enter project cursor position. So we could probably, I think we could delete that function, remove that, and we want to say P. Okay, so we have locators, transport locators to selection, channel, and track visibility agents, show channel tracks with data between the locators. So now when I want to just trigger it as a macro, we'll come over here. So hide tracks with no events in a range, and that will hide everything that doesn't have data within the particular events within the range. So once again, just to show the macro, let's come over here and just like that. All right, and we had a question, I think this came in from Sven Isaacson. I think I replied by email already, but his question was, when dealing with in the drum editor, and I'll jump back to different project here. So let's say at this point, I'll go to this particular project and I'm just going to drag the pattern over. And his question was, when we're in the drum editor, that we see kind of the mute column here. So let's say that we could mute events, but it's not necessarily any visual visual indication that the event is muted. So I don't see a visual indication either, and I sent that along already to Steinberg to make sure that they're aware of it, so that something can be visually indicated so it mutes correctly, but there's no visual indication. So thanks for letting us know about that, Sven. And I think while we're here, we also all right, so we see a question. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to assign a shortcut to a logical editor or project logical editor preset to open it in setup mode, not to execute it? This would be handy in case the preset had a parameter that needs to be edited each time, something faster than open the project logical editor, setup, browsing for the desired preset. Thanks. So there isn't anything like that. One of the things that I had suggested was, maybe a prompt for input function on a logical editor where, if it was, I want to change tracks named this to a particular color. So you can say, and you execute it, instead of saying tracks named this, you could say, ask for user input. And it kind of popped up and you could enter in a particular value. So let me know if that would work for you, but currently you could execute the particular project logical or logical editor preset, but not just kind of to open it and then to modify it. But I'll pass that along as a feature suggestion again. But I've kind of passed on something similar in the past. Okay, we had a question sent in. It says, hi, Greg, I import a pattern, main one, from Forget the Past, which is just what we did here. Then I change the velocity, going fine for all items, but not for snare on beat 3.34. It does not matter if I mute the D1 or only to mute the snares, to mute the snare icon and groove. This happens sometimes for other groove drum kits when I have missed, when I want to change individual velocity in a groove agent pattern. Please tell me what I've missed. So and I'll do this one more time just to make sure it's the same. It's the main one program. So I'm just going to drag this to the project window. And let's do some quick editing on it. So we'll go full screen. And let's look at the snare drum. So I think you said on measure 3. All right, so as we I don't have any problems. Let's look at just the velocity here, and let's go to the snare. So when I go to edit the velocity, it's kind of edits as is expected. I could mute my notes here, all of the notes that are selected, or just any of the velocities. So I'm not sure what could be causing that, but if you have a particular project, please feel free to send it to me if you just even wanted to, wipe out everything except for that groove agent part. But it seems like it's working for me without any issues. All right, let me just jump back to our live feed. We got about 5 minutes before we migrate over to Zoom. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. All right, so we see we're at 95 likes. That's great. Thank you, everyone. See if we get to 100 before we wrap up. So if you haven't hit the like button and you've learned a new tip, please feel free to jump in and hit the like button. All right, so we got Patrick's range selection figured out for him with that, I believe, was snapping to the grid. All right, so we have a question from Chris Prongle. Is Cubase on iOS? So yes, it's on iOS, Android, and Chrome OS. All right, so we see, I just see a question. Any thoughts on GPU audio effects? Yeah, so it seems like last year at NAMM, there's a lot of talk about it, but it seems like, and I think I signed up for like a beta, but didn't hear much on it. So I'm not sure if they're shipping yet. I think it's promising technology. I think that there were issues with, latency. It was what a lot of people would run into, but if they kind of cracked that code, that'd be great. So I think it's really promising technology, but I think also that, CPUs are doing wonderful things as well. Let's see. How do Cubase have answers for all of our problems? Thank you, Greg. It's great. Thank you so much. So there's a lot of people who do a lot of very, methodical planning to make sure that, stuff works and makes sense practically. Okay, so we see from Patrick, Greg, delete overlap is on if I move audio by accident, or shrink MIDI again. If I extend, I see empties, delete it, but I feel I need to know how can I get that? Any alternative ways? So, if you wanted to turn it off, if you go to preferences, just go to editing, and then you could toggle delete overlaps on or off right there. So with delete overlaps on, if you have two audio events that are on top of each other, it will delete the underlying event. So you can do that for audio and MIDI. So let's say if we enable it, so we'll turn on delete overlaps, hit apply, hit OK. So now when I do this, whatever it was dragged over kind of gets deleted. So, and we could of course just bring it right back. So if I drag this on top of that, then move that. So what was overlapping is now just gone. All right, so we have one more minute. We'll see if we get one more quick questions in. We see Machine Storm got new Hallian Sonic 7 in colors free. Sounds really nice. That's great. All right, so Patrick just says, Greg, that's great, but let me ask you, no one ever asked from where you learned all of these. Is there any PDF? So there's a Cubase PDF. So, one of the things you could do if you want to study the manual, there's two kind of help documents. So let's say if we just pop over to, Cubase 12 manual, it's under like Steinberg.help. So if, and I still refer to documentation. So the web help is just kind of like very easy, easily digestible information. So you can say, okay, this is how I could add this. It's not as much detail as if you go to, I always navigate to the PDF versions here. And this is kind of like the traditional manual. Like if you could print it out like a book and you'd be able to kind of see everything right here. So here's your 1,400 page manual of, all the nuts and bolts. So All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the Zoom meeting up. So I'm going to paste the link one more time. Thank you, everyone, for wonderful questions. And we're going to migrate over to Zoom. We'll keep this open. Make sure everyone could sneak over. So I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. And we'll migrate here in a couple minutes. All right. All right, so we see Brian Sawyer, Brian Furlong. All right, I'm going to turn my camera off and turn my light on in my office so I don't look red. Hang on just a second. All right, there's more people joining. All right, we have Jan joining. Make sure John gets in. He had a hard time getting in last time. All right, so it looks like people were able to get in. I didn't post a wrong link this time. It's always helpful on my part. All right, I'm going to go check on the live stream really quick. We'll see how that is. We'll wrap up the live stream here in just a minute. All right, see Nick joining. All right, and we have Soren joining. All right, we'll give it our 30 seconds on the live stream, and I'll shut that off, and we'll transition to Zoom.
Brian Sawyer, by chance, do you used to have a Quantum 4848? Persona? I don't know. I saw Brian Sawyer review on Sweetwater the other day, and I was like, wait a minute. There may be another one, but
No, that was me. That was, that's an old review. Okay.
maybe it was a different one. I was looking at a number of things, trying to do some research, so I was just curious.
Well, if it's spelt the way my name is spelt, which is rare, there's only two of us in the world right now.
I was gonna say it would be quite an